or good person will show you your palace in heaven and you'll be ready to go. And the opposite happened. It's like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she said the 5 stages when people react to death or any bad news. I tell them as a believer, I start from stage 5. I accept whatever comes from God. So we don't like to die as a common rule, but when death comes, we accept it. We know it's a true thing. The only true thing would happen to all of us in this room. We know we all going to die. Some planning to get married, you might get, might not, but death is going to happen to all of us. So as Muslim, death we especially practice in Muslim, they accept death easily. And, but it doesn't mean facing death of a beloved one going to be easy for people.
So acceptance and modesty. I think in the healthcare field, if you work there long enough, modesty often goes out the door because we see everything. So thank you for sharing that.
In the Buddhist tradition, we do not posit a deity or a central God figure, neither do we deny it. And fundamentally, who we really are cannot die. And we are more than our physiology. And it seems like the emphasis is extending physiology at all costs, but we abandon people in their transitions. Not on purpose, we've just been conditioned to fear death. So our patients do, and so do we. So when we see that there's nothing else to do physiologically as failure, we abandon people. So I think the most important thing we can do is support anybody's spiritual discipline.
Because our tradition has a similar approach. There's a famous story of a little boy who's sent to the store on his bicycle alone for the first time. And his mom is waiting for him to come home from this little errand, and he's delayed, and she starts to worry and become very concerned for his safety. And finally he appears, but he doesn't have the items that she sent him for. And she said, "What happened? Where were you?" And he said, "Well, on my way to the store, I saw a friend of mine, and he had fallen off his bicycle, and his bicycle was broken." And the mom said, "Well, that's nice, but you don't know anything about fixing bicycles." And the little boy said, "No, but I know how to sit with someone when he cries." There is no single Jewish point of view on any question. Any question. Including hair color, apparently. There's a famous story of 2 students of a great rabbi who were arguing over a point of Jewish law regarding end of life. And one of them says it's definitely this, the other one says it's definitely that. And they decide to go to the rabbi to ask the question. And the first one lays out his argument and says, this is the answer. And the rabbi strokes his beard and says, "You're right." And the other student says, "Wait, I think it's just the opposite," and lays out his argument. The rabbi strokes his beard and says, "You're right." And a third guy says, "But they're saying exactly opposite things. They can't both be right." And the rabbi says, "You're right." So one thing that I think is important, and I wouldn't presume to speak for all of the traditions represented on this panel, but certainly from the point of view of the many Jewish traditions, there is not a single one-size-fits-all. It is a matter of building relationship and asking questions and taking the time to listen. Because in my traditions, in the Jewish tradition, there's a range of belief that goes from people who are completely what we would call gastronomic Jews, people who love the culture and the food and the history of the Jewish people, but who are active in a male anthropomorphic externalized monarchical deity, and everything in between. So the only way that we can know how to best serve people is by asking and then shutting up and listening. One of the people I've learned from recently, a minister named Karen Hutt, reminds us, and I would bless you with the awareness that you already have 90% of what you need to do this well. And that is just being a compassionate and present human being. The other 10% is the practice of presence. And that is something that is easily learned when you have good mentors. It is also, and I think you mentioned humility. The other thing that I would mention is that the Jewish definition of humility is the awareness that we have something to learn from everyone. And it is about knowing how much space to take up. When you are a physician and you have expertise and you have information, it is important that you have the floor. If you are a social worker or a nurse or otherwise providing, if you are in the billing department, some of the people we interact with the most as patients, by the way. This practice of presence is important there, and knowing how much space to take up is part of that definition of humility. So there is no one-size-fits-all. In the Jewish tradition, there is a range of beliefs about what happens after we die that goes from absolutely nothing to we return to the earth, because as you know, in our tradition, we do not embalm. The bottoms of our coffins are drilled with holes that are laid down directly on the earth. We put the vaults in upside down so that the bottom of the coffin is touching the earth and decomposes as quickly as possible. So many people believe you return to the earth. That's one end of the spectrum. Others believe in the idea of a supernal Garden of Eden. And one of the prayers that we say when traditional people die is, may you find rest beneath the wings of the Shekhinah, the divine feminine presence in the Garden of Eden. So what I would just emphasize is asking and listening, and that requires humility, and recognizing that I think in most of our traditions there is not one size fits all for any question that we might ask or any end-of-life issue that we might encounter.
Thank you. But that really highlights the importance of spiritual assessments, and that's something to consider within your practices. In your toolkits, there is information about different websites and resources that can provide references for spiritual assessments. So next, let's talk a little bit about barriers that we face when addressing advanced care planning and end-of-life care from a faith and cultural-based perspective.
Well, just listening to these last responses for the traditions, I can really see so many similar ideas, because obviously we, in the Catholic tradition, we believe there's one God and one who created us out of love, for love, to love, and that we are all unique and unrepeatable. And so all of our journeys are unique and unrepeatable. There will never be another you. There will never be another your journey. Everybody's on a trajectory of life, and it's special and it's unique. So in the Catholic faith tradition, we are what we call sacramental, and the sacraments are that attempt really that they come through Jesus. They're that attempt to make real an invisible reality, because we are corporeal people. So there's these intangibles that we know to exist, and we try in some way to make them tangible through the senses. So when a Catholic is coming to that end of life journey, part of their journey, we believe that there is eternal life, and we are created to be in eternal existence with God the Father in heaven, in a perfect state of happiness and joy that comes. Generally, we believe that if we live a good life, we'll probably die a happy death, So we have the sacrament. So when a Catholic is at that point, one of the things that we say is, of course, like Basmir and Hava, I'm trying to get his name. We talk about, the importance of never coming into anything that violates human dignity or is violent against human dignity. Of course, Jesus was a complete pacifist. So violence is never something that would be appropriate for a follower, somebody that says they're a disciple of Jesus. So when a Catholic, though, is at that point, I'm trying to think of some barriers. I think within any faith tradition, and I know you know this as practitioners, some people are unaware, really, that they may subscribe to a certain faith tradition, but to be honest, they really don't know that much about it themselves, depending on how well they've studied or lived or followed their own faith tradition. But it's something obviously of great importance to them at that moment. So we have the sacraments of, primarily at the end of life, of reconciliation. So that's an effort to help somebody come into an awareness of maybe something that they're sorry for or that they regret or they want cleared up before they move on to eternal life. So the sacrament of reconciliation comes along with, that's the ministry of the priest. So we always recommend trying to find a priest, someone to administer that sacrament, and also the anointing of the sick, another corporeal way to understand God's mercy and love through the sacrament of anointing and touch and healing, touch in that sense. And then, of course, we have our ultimate sacrament, which is the Eucharist, which is that food for the journey. That if we're called into that Catholic faith tradition, we're called into a Eucharistic bond with the others within the faith community. So that would be something that we want to make sure we try in every which way to have that available to the various, to the patients at that time.
And one of the barriers that can take us into one of the case studies that we actually have here is the patient that's waiting for a miracle. So I'll give you a brief overview of a case that one of the practices had. A 46-year-old female diagnosed with metastatic melanoma has exhausted all standard treatment options. You recommend hospice care. The patient states, "I'm waiting for the miracle from God to heal me. You can't give up on me yet." So, barriers there.
Well, I would like to talk about an experience with my grandmother. The doctor had diagnosed her with cancer, pancreas cancer, and they wanted to do, I think it's a colostomy bag on her. And my mother was like, no, I believe God is going to heal you. Let's not go with that procedure. Let's wait and see what God does. And so my mother went to a church service, and the minister had called her up, and she, asked for a special prayer for her mother, which is my grandmother. And they had prayer, and as they were praying, my mother said she had felt like a burning sensation in her stomach at the time. And she didn't know what it was, but she felt like that area was where my grandmother had the cancer. And she felt it like get released. And so she went back to my grandmother, and she told her about that experience. And they talked about it. And then a few weeks later, the doctor called us and wanted everybody to come down to the hospital. So we were all in the attic, we didn't know what the doctor was going to say. So we all get there, and the doctor calls us in, and he says, a few weeks ago we saw this mass, and we knew it was cancerous. We ran tests and all that. It's cancer. But today, we can't find it. We don't know what happened. I don't know. We're confused. This does not add up. mother and grandmother, they looked at each other, I said God was going to heal you. And that there was a miracle in itself. And so when I hear physicians, and I know that they are very educated, I know that they are have gone to school many, many years to do what they do, and I appreciate all of that. But God is the giver of life, and that's what we believe. He's the giver of life. And if a patient says that they're waiting on a miracle, then I think when you address this, you should come into some agreement with your patient and find out and learn what they're trying to tell you. I think the healthcare industry is a lot like a marriage. If you don't listen, your marriage won't go too far. And men that are in the room, and if you know what I'm talking about, you really have to listen. Turn the Tigers off, turn whatever sports team you're watching, turn it off, and listen. And I think a lot of times when we are in these positions, I know there are systems in place when a new patient comes in, got all these documents, got all this paperwork, got to do this, got to sign this, got to sign that. There should be some document about somebody's faith. What do you believe? What can I do to help you in that area? Or how can we work together? And I know that a lot of it's money driven. I understand that. We all have to make a living. But there should be some time when you take out of your schedule to learn your patient. Learn your patient. Learn what they like. The doctor talked about the little candy bag for her 4-year-old daughter. Right? These are pleasantries that were exchanged. When we come together and understand that we are all human beings, we all need to love and care for each other. Forget about the insurance bill for right now. Don't worry about that right now. Let's make a connection with who we are as people.
Are there any other thoughts from the panel about barriers or perspectives about grooming, ceremonies, rituals that take place? And we talked about some.
Bonjour. I don't know, you talk about barriers. I don't know if you're talking about my barriers or you're talking about your barriers. But I think a barrier is the fear to ask the question thing. Life is fatal, no matter how we look at it. And for my teachings and what I learned is that, this is just something we borrow for a short time in this body. And we're spiritual beings coming from the spiritual world, coming here to have a human experience. And then when it's done, then we go back to the spiritual world. And so this is just an in-between. It's not even, this is just, the real life is the spiritual person that's traveling through this world. So when we come from that spiritual world, we come here, we're given gifts to be here. There's this 4 gifts that men and women get coming into this world that we're told, that helps us how we conduct ourselves through this world, how we live, how we face death. And if we are helping people and you're looking at them and you don't know what to say, I think first is, those 7 grandfather teachings talk about love and respect. First, show a little love for them. And respect is by asking them, is there someone you would like to have come here for you? Instead of trying to figure out what are you going to say to them. But ask them, is there someone you'd like to come here to be here? And they'll say, yeah, I'll raise it, I won't muffle it. No, just kidding. And, you know, so I think one of the things is understanding, you know, that fear that we're afraid to ask questions. And then in our fear, you know, we stumble through trying to figure out what to do. And so, you know, there's no wrong questions. And if we have all the answers, you know, the conversation dies quickly. But it's the questions, we ask the right questions for that person. I think that's our barrier, is to fail to ask questions that need to be. What are the sacred questions we need to ask somebody when, you know, they're on their way out?
I'll just add a little bit to that, to speak to what you said. To me, it seems questions are important, and sometimes the space of questions is blocked. But when I go up on the floors, you know, we have to do electronic records. The documentation is so fragmented that chart review and documentation takes up more time than patient care, which is tragic. And a lot of times we have a preconceived idea of what we think somebody should do or how they should respond or what we're going to apply to the patient, that we forget to ask the questions. And so to me, the preconception or your ideas about things, you're looking at that and you're not looking at who's right in front of you. So as healthcare providers, I think it's important to keep that in mind. To me, the practice of meditation helps my awareness practice beyond any particular spiritual discipline. That is the spiritual discipline, cultivating the ability to be with each other.
And about the miracle subject, I think our mental and physical state, they are so connected. When like fear make us more, like we get sick more, we get more negativity like in our life. Our immune system drops when we are fearful. So the way we talk to people, we need to listen. And people, when they believe in miracles, it's okay to believe in miracles because everybody deserves that hope. It's a hope deserved by everyone to believe there is something can be done. But the practical way for health providers is to tell them there is a possibility it's going to be the end of life. So if you have any unfinished business, you can do it now. And even though if you are going to outlive all of us with miracles, which will happen, and it happened many times, so we need to listen, like he was saying, we need to listen to the people, listen to their concern, listen, like validate what they are saying. Take it to heart and talk to them like beloved, how you talk to your beloved people. Be concerned with them, not just professional, like with distance and I'm doing my job. It's being a health provider is the most humane job anybody could have. And you are in charge and you have the responsibility of maintaining people's health, which is very important part of our life, to have healthy bodies too, so we will be the most productive. So respecting the human in front of us, treat them as human, respect their ideas, not to laugh, like leave the room and they will hear us talking about what you just heard. Like, I think, like I said, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity.
It seems to me, though, that we have some very close friends who are physicians, and I don't know anybody who goes into healthcare because of the glory, the great money, and the fantastic hours that you all work. The reality is that I think one of the barriers is beyond the cultural, the religious, the spiritual, is that you all are under immense time pressure. And the one thing that makes the biggest difference in patient care, particularly at end of life, is having the time to stop and pause and ask and listen and be present. So in some ways, I think the biggest barriers that you face are not necessarily cultural, religious, or spiritual, but working within a really difficult system that demands that you have to be watching 7 minutes in, this is what happened. 15 minutes in, this is what happened, because you know if you're running late on that person, that's how the rest of your day is going to go. So I think it's really challenging. That barrier is systemic. And that doesn't have anything to do with you doing anything wrong. It has to do with facing some of the realities of the healthcare delivery system in which most of you have to operate. So while we talk about listening and speaking and all these wonderful compassionate practices, I don't want, from my point of view, I don't want that, although this doesn't sound Jewish at all, I don't want you should feel guilty if you can't do all of this all the time, right? You can only do what you can do. And so just to have a little bit of mercy and compassion on yourselves for what you're able to do in the context in which you are delivering services. So have a little mercy on yourselves in how you apply all of these wonderful ideals in real life. So have compassion and mercy on you. That's where it needs to start.
We want to get questions from the audience. We have time for one person over here.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about barriers, and I think that the biggest barrier, so I think the biggest barrier is the reluctance on the part of the healthcare team, the doctor in particular, to engage in a discussion of things at all. And that I see over and over again in many colleagues and myself at times. And I've heard certain themes up here about being present. It's not just one time, you do it at one time. It's an ongoing relationship, taking the time to understand the patient and where they're coming from. But I think there's huge barriers. I'm going to give you a little anecdote, talking about stories. So my story is about my partner, Andy Eisenberg. He retired last September. Great doc, been in practice for 37 years. Andy is Jewish by faith, but he's not really a practicing Jew at all, and didn't have, in the 35 years I've known, never was very religious or anything. And so he had a patient come in from the fundamental Protestant tradition who had a lymphoma, and he asked, the patient asked Andy to pray over him. You can imagine, anybody who knew Andy Eisenberg, you can imagine his chagrin on this. But he was open to it, and he said, I'll tell you what, see, I'll lay my hand on you, and you say the words. So that's how he dealt with it. But the point is that I think the biggest barrier we have, yes, it's time and other things, but it's our willingness to open up to and understand where the patient is coming from, and our willingness to even discuss these things, because we're not trained in medicine to do any of that. We're not trained to have, I don't think in medical school, when that was a long time ago, but we never had even something like this, where they were trying to make you more sensitive to cultural differences and things like of that nature. But, and so it's not something that you're really trained to do. It's something that, and varying doctors have different feelings about it. I mean, somebody asks you to pray with them. Do you do that? That becomes, when you start talking about the doctors about that, it becomes very awkward, right? In their responses. Some feel more comfortable than others. So I think that's the biggest barrier. And so how, your thoughts from your panelists on that.
a story to address your story. I was up on the oncology floor seeing a patient, and it was my job after we got the news of his cancer, and he was in his 70s, and it looked like he could have some improvement with medical intervention, but the treatment was going to make his physical abilities much lower, maybe temporarily. So I had to work with him and assess his mobility, and could his wife take care of him at home, or did he have to go to a nursing home for subacute rehab? So I go in there and I introduce myself and we get acquainted, and then I assess his mobility, and you're in somebody's physical space, you naturally develop a rapport and get closer. And sometimes things are shared in that space. And he looked at me and he said, "Am I going to die?" And I looked at him and I started to laugh, and I was mortified that I was laughing, but that's what came out. And I said, "Yeah, you're going to die, and so am I. We're all going to die." And we looked at each other and we started to laugh, like hysterically. And then he started to cry. And then he opened up and he said, "Nobody talks about dying." I think just to have a discussion.
Yes, I think one of the barrier is having the courage to talk about that thing. And, all of us, you probably know that when there's a death in your family, it's like, hurry, let's get it over with and move on. So there's no actually a short ceremony, but, in my culture, we have 4 days of ceremonies for someone that passes away. And I think one of the hardest things is to talk with somebody who's walking into death backwards. In other words, they're afraid to die. So there's this fear. And so instead of embracing that, they're walking backwards to it. Because they're looking back at what they had in life. And that's what they want to hold on to it. And how do we turn them around to face that? Face that death and talk with it. And to embrace it. My children and my grandchildren, we're always talking about death, and we look at that. So when it comes their time, they're ready for it. I've come into my time, I'm not afraid to die. I'll embrace that. In order to live life, you have to live with death too. And as I get closer to that time, as I get older, I know one of my foot is going into the spirit world and one's living in this world day. But I can be comfortable with that, and I can live my life with that. So how do we talk to people who are facing that, who are walking into death backwards? We have to have the courage and the respect, and to listen to them. If they ask, pray for me. If you don't believe it, if you don't believe in prayer, that's your own opinion, but show respect to that person and say, okay, pray for them anyways. Someday you may be asking the same thing. It's how do we have to learn about it. We have to teach our children, our family members, how to face death, how to be with death, how to sit with death. And it starts at a very young age. It's not something to fear because we're all going there. I know that where I go, I have relatives already there waiting for me. And people who are facing death already see their relatives coming talking to them, coming to show them the way. This has been documented in many hospitals. So there is a place that we're going to. I know where I'm going because my ancestors have told me. So it's just, how do we sit with people who are facing death?
Thank you.
I want to thank you all.
It's on.
I want to thank you all for your comments. Pastor Sanders, you brought up something about a miracle. And I guess I would ask all of you or any of you, having had those kinds of discussions with patients who clearly I thought were not in any condition to consider any therapy, I found myself in a situation where a woman was waiting for a miracle from God. God, this was going to, her end was going to be in God's hands. And it sort of took me out of the equation as the physician. How should I respond to someone who says, well, you know, it's in God's hands, and I'll let God do whatever he or she sees fit for me. And yet myself, as a steward of limited medical resources, I now have to make decisions about what to do for that person. Do I advise expensive treatments, diagnostic tests, things that perhaps I might otherwise say, well, go home, have your miracle. I'll be waiting for you, I'll be here for you, and if you get into trouble, we'll handle it. Do you have any ideas of what I might have said to your grandmother or your family members who said it's in God's hands? What should I say?
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story. My grandson was born at 5 months, and my daughter was in Traverse City, and she was having a really hard time. She went into labor at 5 months, and she was having a really hard time, and she was like all night into the day. Well, you know, and eventually we called some women from home to come over, and they sang some birthing songs for her when the baby was born. But when the baby was born, there was complications at that time, so they had to fly him out down to Grand Rapids. Well, we have, you know, I have other children, so half my family went to Grand Rapids, and I had to stay home with the little ones. But when I came there, I walked into the room, and my daughter was crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because the doctor said he's not going to make it through the night." I said, "Don't listen to them." I said, "You have to have faith. If you give up, he's not going to make it. We have to have faith that he's going to survive." And we tell him, reinforce that with him, that he'll survive. And we sang every morning, every time I came there, we sang on phones, healing songs, so he could listen to that. Every day I told my family to encourage him, say good words to him. We didn't leave that child for the 4.5 months that he was there. My family stayed with him around the clock. We didn't leave that. And the doctors down in Grand Rapids said, "You can't stay here." You know. And we said, my wife said, "Yes, we can." So we know you probably are good people, but you're strangers to us, and we don't leave our children with strangers. And so we didn't leave. And we stayed and we talked positive things to that baby. Today that baby's 3 years old. And that baby, they said, would never live a normal life. Wouldn't be able to speak, or wouldn't be able to hear and talk and hear. But it was faith. Having faith, regardless of what religion, we all have to have faith. And we have to reinsure that faith with people. Whether they're looking for a miracle, yes, have faith that that miracle is going to happen. Reaffirm them with that.
So can I address that? Thank you, Paul. You were asking, what would you do in that situation? I believe all of us have encounters in life. And sometimes those encounters has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with the other person. Maybe the encounter wasn't for the patient. It could have been for the physician. When that doctor told my grandmother and my mother that he was confused, that he didn't understand what happened, it triggered something in his mind that he carried throughout his practice for the rest of his life. What would you do in a situation like that? I would encourage you, in your spare time, in your quiet time, seek answers for the patient, along with the patient. If the patient is saying, I'm going to live, even though it defies medicine, even though it defies all the odds, there may be 1% that you can connect with this patient's faith that will cause a better outcome.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. But our panelists will be around, so we do encourage you to talk to them. If you have any additional questions, please come up. These are the resources that are in your toolkit, so please make sure you check those out as well.